they said she was everything I wasn't.
Polished.
Predictable. The sort of woman you take home to prove you made the right choices. He traded my chaos for her perfection without blinking. I used to think that was my ending, being the girl he outgrew. But endings are quiet rehearsals for the next act. Nobody tells you that. They rewrote my story before I had a chance to live it. Friends called it heartbreak, but it was something bigger. It was the dark soil where something unkillable was rooting itself.
I didn't know it then.
Didn't know he'd be sitting in the last row, trying not to look at me when they called my name. Didn't know I'd feel nothing but clarity. My name is Alyssa Morgan. I'm 32, and I live in Portland, Oregon. If you'd asked me at 25 where my life was headed, I would have painted a picture so clean, so reassuring. You'd think I had everything figured out. I thought I did. I thought love was simple math. You gave your best, and the other person stayed. I thought ambition was a straight road. You worked hard, and success came in steady increments. I thought loyalty was a kind of insurance policy. If you were good enough, nobody would ever leave. My plan was so precise, it felt more like a blueprint than a life. I was supposed to build a marriage that looked like my parents', the kind with Christmas cards and coordinated sweaters. I was supposed to rise up the ranks of my marketing firm in Seattle, maybe become a director by 30. I was supposed to buy a house with a craftsman porch and a kitchen island, the kind of place my mom could visit and say, "I'm proud of you." My boyfriend, then fiancé, was Ethan Parker. He was the kind of man you introduce with both names because it makes him sound more legitimate. He was steady. The sort of person who never left a dish in the sink, who remembered anniversaries, who planned out each week on a whiteboard. We met in college at a student leadership retreat. I remember the first time he held my hand. I thought, this is it. This is the person who will keep me safe from every storm. For the first few years, it was almost boring how perfect everything was. We had dinner with his parents on Sundays, went to spin class on Wednesdays, and saved up for a future we talked about, as though it were inevitable. But something in me was always restless. I was the girl who doodled business ideas in the margins of meeting notes, who dreamed of starting a nonprofit, who scribbled half-finished poems after midnight. I was always reaching for something just out of view.
Ethan used to smile at that.
He'd kiss my forehead and say, "I love how you dream. I just hope you'll pick one thing someday." I didn't pick one thing. I picked all of them. I burned myself out trying to become everything. A model employee, a perfect fiancé, an unstoppable visionary. There was never enough time to do it all. I'd leave the office late, forget to call his mother back, skip gym classes, let dishes pile up, and still feel like I hadn't done nearly enough. When my company downsized, I was among the first to go. I remember the day they called me into the conference room. The HR manager, some woman I'd only ever seen in passing, was holding a stack of papers. She looked at me like she felt sorry, but also inconvenienced. "I'm afraid your position has been eliminated," she said, and just like that, the blueprint started to unravel. Ethan tried to be supportive at first. He told me it was just a setback, that I was too talented to stay unemployed for long. He hugged me every morning before he left for work. But with each passing week, I felt the patience draining out of him like water from a leaking faucet. I began applying to jobs obsessively. Dozens a day. Marketing coordinator, communications specialist, content strategist. Anything that sounded like a respectable title. My inbox became a graveyard of rejections. Some were polite form letters. Others didn't bother to reply at all. The longer it lasted, the more I could feel something shifting between us. He stopped asking how the applications were going. He started working later, coming home tired and quiet. He stopped touching me with the easy affection we'd once shared. One night, I made an elaborate dinner, rosemary chicken, roasted vegetables, a bottle of Cabernet we'd been saving for something special. I was determined to remind us who we used to be. When he came home, he set his briefcase down and looked at the candles flickering on the table. For a moment, his face softened, and I thought maybe we could find our way back. But halfway through the meal, he cleared his throat. "Alyssa," he began, "we need to talk." Nothing good has ever followed those words. He looked everywhere, but at me as he spoke. "I've been thinking a lot about where this is going, about us." I tried to keep my voice steady. Okay. You've been struggling, he said, as though I were a patient with a condition no one could diagnose. And I've tried to be there, but I don't know if we're on the same path anymore. I wanted to scream. What path? The one I built for us? The one that collapsed under my feet while you stood watching? Instead, I asked, is there someone else? He hesitated just long enough to answer me, without words. Her name was Lauren. She worked in his office. I'd met her once, at the holiday party. She'd worn a red dress and a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. I remembered thinking she was the kind of woman men left their lives for, calm, elegant, safe. He tried to explain it as though it were a math problem with an unavoidable solution. She's just steady. And I need that. You're incredible, Alyssa, but you're always chasing something. I never know where you'll land. He was right in his own way. I was always reaching. I was always hoping for more than what the world handed me. But in that moment, it sounded like a curse. When he left that night, he took more than his clothes. He took the illusion that love was something you could earn by being good enough. The next few weeks were a haze of cardboard boxes and whispered condolences. My mother came up from Oregon to help me pack. She spoke in careful sentences, as if I might shatter if she used the wrong words. He was never really the right one, she said, folding my sweaters into neat stacks. I wanted to ask her if she'd always thought that, if she'd ever believed in us. But I didn't have the energy for another disappointment. When she left, the apartment felt cavernous. Every corner was a monument to what I'd lost. The ring-shaped indent on my nightstand. The empty space where his shoes used to line up like soldiers. The silence. Friends tried to help in the only way they knew how. They offered cliches dressed as comfort. You'll find someone else. You're better off without him. At least you know now. None of it helped. The only thing that helped was time, and even that moved too slowly to notice. People stopped asking how I was. They stopped checking in. Eventually, they stopped mentioning Ethan's name. It was as though he'd died, and I was expected to bury him in the same graveyard as all my failed plans. I tried to find a new job, but every interview felt like a performance I wasn't prepared to give. I started to think maybe I was unhireable, unlovable, unremarkable. My dad called me once a week, his voice gentle but laced with worry. You know, sweetheart, it might be time to just pick something.
Any job.
Even if it's not what you thought you'd be doing. I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. I wanted to tell him that it wasn't just about work. That losing Ethan had rearranged something fundamental in me. That I no longer knew what version of myself I was supposed to build. I didn't say any of it. Instead, I applied to a part-time administrative job at a community center near my old neighborhood in Portland. It was the kind of work you take when you've run out of options and want to prove to the world, or maybe just to yourself, that you can still show up. When I got the email offering me the position, I didn't feel triumph, just a hollow relief. I packed the last of my boxes, locked the apartment one final time, and drove back to Oregon with everything I owned in the trunk. I didn't cry as I left Seattle behind. I didn't feel much of anything. That was the strangest part. I had spent so long trying to be indispensable to someone else that I had no idea what it felt like to belong to myself. But in that emptiness, something was quietly waiting for me. The start of a life I hadn't planned. A life no one else would notice at first. The community center looked like a place time had overlooked. A squat brick building with faded blue trim and a hand-painted sign that read Maplewood Outreach Center. It stood across from an abandoned grocery store and a bus stop nobody used after dark. The parking lot was cracked and sprouting weeds. A single rusted bike rack leaned against the side wall, as if it had given up trying to stay upright. I remember my first morning there, standing in the doorway with my cardboard box of office supplies. I felt like an imposter in my own skin, too educated, too brittle, too recently abandoned to be of use to anyone. The director was a woman named Maribel Ruiz. She was in her 50s, with short gray hair and warm brown eyes that seemed to see right through every defensive layer I carried. "Welcome, Alyssa," she said, her voice low and steady. "I'm glad you're here." It was the first time in months someone had said they were glad I existed. I tried to smile. "Thanks. I'm looking forward to helping." It wasn't entirely true. I didn't know if I had anything left to offer. But the words felt better than silence. My job description was vague. Manage paperwork, coordinate volunteers, assist with technology classes, help clients navigate services. In other words, do whatever needed doing. Most mornings, I sat behind a metal desk, sorting donation forms and answering the phone in a voice that sounded steadier than I felt. Some days, I'd help set up folding chairs for senior yoga or distribute flyers for the weekly food pantry. At first, I did everything mechanically. Wake up, drive to the center, complete the tasks, drive home, eat something I couldn't taste, go to bed. If Maribel noticed, she never commented. She just left little notes in my inbox. Thank you for staying late. I appreciate your attention to detail. You made today smoother. I kept every note.
I didn't know why.
Maybe because they felt like proof I hadn't disappeared entirely. It was about 3 weeks in when the spark found me. We were piloting a small program to teach basic computer skills to older adults. Maribel had convinced a local credit union to donate 10 refurbished laptops. The first class was scheduled for a Tuesday afternoon in the multipurpose room. I'd never taught anyone before. Certainly not people in their 70s and 80s who'd never touched a keyboard. That morning, I arrived early to set up the machines. I taped handwritten labels on each keyboard, enter, spacebar, power, because the sticky plastic ones had all been claimed by the after-school program. When the participants shuffled in, I felt my throat tighten. 10 pairs of wary eyes studied me as though I might break them along with the computers. The oldest was a woman named Dorothy. She wore a lavender cardigan and orthopedic sneakers. She squinted at me, then at her laptop, then back at me. "Are you the teacher?" she demanded. "I guess so," I said. "I'm Alyssa." She nodded skeptically, as if she didn't quite believe a girl my age could teach her anything worth knowing. I started the class by showing them how to power on the laptops. It took nearly 15 minutes just to get everyone to the same screen. Some pressed the power button twice and shut it right back off. Some forgot their glasses. A few were too nervous to touch anything without permission. Dorothy was the most vocal. "This machine hates me," she muttered under her breath, loud enough for the others to hear. I knelt beside her. "It doesn't hate you. It's just never been properly introduced." She stared at me, one eyebrow raised, and for a split second, I thought she might walk out. But then her mouth twitched, and she tried again. By the end of the hour, she'd managed to open a simple word processor and type her name. Each keystroke was slow and deliberate, like she was chiseling letters into marble. When she finished, she sat back and regarded the screen with a mix of wonder and suspicion. "I didn't think I could do that," she said quietly. In that moment, something shifted in me. It was like watching a small light switch on in a dark room, small but enough to see by. Over the next few weeks, the class became the only place I felt remotely useful. Every Tuesday and Thursday afternoon, the same 10 faces would shuffle in and take their places. Dorothy always claimed the same chair, third from the left. They learned to send emails to their grandchildren, search for recipes, pay utility bills online. Each new skill was a small victory, met with applause and sometimes tears. One day, Dorothy pulled a folded envelope from her purse and held it out to me. "My son," she explained, her voice trembling. "He's in Arizona. I haven't seen him in years. Last week I emailed him. He called me the next day. He's coming to visit." I felt my eyes sting as I took the envelope. "That's wonderful," I said. And I meant it more than anything I'd said in months. She reached out and patted my hand. "You brought my baby into my living room," she whispered. I didn't know how to respond, so I just squeezed her hand back. After she left, I sat alone in the multipurpose room, the computers humming softly around me. It wasn't a marketing job at a prestigious firm. It wasn't a 6-figure salary or a corner office. It wasn't the kind of work that impressed men like Ethan or made my parents brag to their friends. But it mattered. It mattered to Dorothy. It mattered to me. And in that quiet room, surrounded by outdated laptops and a whiteboard covered in crooked diagrams, I felt something I hadn't felt in a very long time. Purpose. It didn't make headlines, but it mattered. Growth doesn't always arrive with fanfare. Sometimes it slips in unnoticed, one task at a time, until suddenly, your days look nothing like they used to, and you realize you've rebuilt your life without even meaning to. That's how it was with Maplewood. By the end of my first year, the small computer literacy program had grown into 3 rotating classes per week with a waitlist. We applied for a small city grant and got it. That allowed us to hire a part-time assistant and purchase newer laptops. I revamped the flyers, rewrote the curriculum, and started tracking feedback data. Maribel smiled at the way I color-coded everything. "You know," she said one morning as we reviewed participant surveys, "I think you were meant to build things." I looked up from the spreadsheet. I thought I had to build something big to matter. She shook her head. "You built something that works. That's more rare than people think." Those words stayed with me. Within another 6 months, we partnered with the county library system to offer pop-up tech sessions at branch locations. I created a training manual for volunteers and developed a 4-tier progression system. What started as a pilot class became something real, something replicable. We were onboarding nearly 1,200 seniors per month across our various touchpoints, classes, digital help desks, in-home tech assistants. Local banks began referring their elderly clients to us for digital financial literacy. Even the Department of Aging sent inquiries. The data blew me away. Our email open rate was 78%. That was higher than some Fortune 500 companies. People weren't just clicking, they were engaging, writing back, referring friends. I started presenting at small conferences, talking about accessibility and trust in digital outreach. At one event in Eugene, someone from the mayor's office approached me after my panel. "Your program is exactly what our community needs," she said. "Would you be open to consulting?" I nodded, stunned. But while the professional landscape bloomed, the personal remained barren, distant. I remember visiting my parents for Thanksgiving that year. My brother and his wife were already there when I arrived. She was showing off photos from their recent trip to Hawaii. My niece, 3 years old with cheeks like dough, ran to greet me with sticky fingers and a crooked grin. I held her tightly. Dinner was the usual swirl of conversation and clinking silverware. At some point, my dad asked what I'd been up to. I explained, with restrained pride, the expansion of our programs and our latest partnership with a tech nonprofit based in San Francisco. My brother looked up from his plate and said, "So you're still teaching old folks to click buttons?" I smiled politely. "Among other things, yes." His wife giggled into her wine glass. "That's noble work." There it was. That word again. Noble, a euphemism for something sweet, but insignificant. A hobby. A mercy project. They didn't mean to be cruel. But indifference can cut sharper than scorn. It tells you you don't matter enough to offend. I watched as they moved on to other topics, my brother's potential promotion, his wife's yoga certification. I went quiet, the way you do when you realize there's no space carved out for your voice at the table. Later that night, my mom came into my old room while I was folding laundry. She perched on the edge of the bed, looking tired but kind. "You know we love you, right?" she said softly. "Of course." She hesitated, then added, "We just worry sometimes that you're not living up to your full potential." I almost laughed. Not out of humor, but out of disbelief. I wanted to tell her that I had 14 staff across 3 counties now, that I was running workshops for Google's Digital Inclusion Initiative, that the curriculum I wrote was being piloted statewide. Instead, I nodded and said, "I understand." Because what would be the point? They still measured success in titles and salary and square footage. They didn't know how to recognize a legacy that wore sneakers and carried a laptop bag with stickers on it. The same pattern repeated in other places. A former coworker from my marketing firm ran into me at a coffee shop one afternoon. We chatted briefly. When I told him where I worked, his eyebrows lifted slightly. "That's sweet," he said. "You always had a big heart. Not everyone's cut out for the corporate grind." As if I'd been filtered out for being too soft. But I wasn't soft. I was sharp enough to teach an 81-year-old woman how to FaceTime her grandson and get her smiling through tears. I was resilient enough to take public funding and turn it into a sustainable infrastructure. I was resourceful enough to run a $400,000 budget on grants, donations, and stretchable dreams. But no one from my old world saw any of that. Not my former friends, who drifted away when wedding invites and baby showers took precedence. Not Ethan, who, despite still living in the same city, hadn't spoken a word to me since that final night in Seattle. The last I heard, he and Lauren got engaged and bought a condo near Green Lake. Sometimes I'd see them tagged in photos, at fundraisers, wine tastings, brunches with coordinated outfits and captions like, "Feeling grateful." Part of me still tensed when I saw his name. Not because I wanted him back, but because a small voice still whispered, "He doesn't know what you've become." But that voice grew fainter with each passing season. Because I was building something enduring, something stitched from late nights, small victories, and people who started to believe in themselves because I first believed in them. Still, the paradox remained. In professional circles, I was being invited to speak. I had clients. I was training the next wave of community tech leaders. One of my classes was even featured in a local magazine. Yet, at family dinners, I was still the free spirit. The one who didn't quite fit. The one who did nice things but never had much to show for it. That's the thing no one tells you about healing. It often happens out of you. And when it doesn't come with certificates or applause, people assume it never happened. But I knew the truth. Every time a woman told me she no longer needed her son to pay her bills online, every time a man in his 70s sent his first email to a long-lost brother, every time a shy volunteer became a confident instructor, I knew I was doing work that echoed. And I didn't need my family to see it for it to be real. But a small part of me, maybe the same part that once built blueprints of a life with Ethan, still wished, once in a while, someone would look at me and say, "We see you. We see what you've built." That moment hadn't come yet. But I was learning to live and thrive in its absence. The invitation came on a Wednesday, folded between a stack of community flyers and grant renewal forms. It was printed on thick cardstock, embossed in silver. Portland Civic Honors Night, celebrating quiet impact. You are cordially invited to attend the 12th Annual Civic Honors Night as a distinguished nominee. I read it 3 times before I believed it. A board member from the county tech department had submitted our name months ago, apparently after sitting in on one of our pop-up library sessions. The event recognized individuals and organizations making meaningful, sustainable change across underrepresented communities. I hadn't applied. I hadn't campaigned. I didn't know I was even on anyone's radar. I emailed Maribel, who had moved to a regional advisory role by then, and she replied within 5 minutes. "You deserve this. I'll be in the front row with tissues." The event was held at the Arlene Schnitzer Concert Hall downtown. Red carpet. Media booths. A giant screen that looped photos of volunteers, food banks, city gardens, and public art. When I walked in, I felt small and out of place. I wore a navy blue dress I'd found on clearance and heels that made me wobble slightly. I hadn't worn heels in nearly a year. A young man handed me a program. My name, Alyssa Morgan, was printed under the Community Tech and Access Champion category. I took a seat at table 16 near the middle of the ballroom, surrounded by people in tailored suits and sparkling earrings. My hands shook slightly as I reached for the glass of water in front of me. The ceremony opened with speeches from city officials. Then came videos, short, heart-tugging stories about clean water initiatives, after-school programs, senior care partnerships. Each one ended with applause, some more enthusiastic than others. And then it happened. The lights dimmed, and a video began to play for the Community Tech and Access segment. It wasn't my face on the screen. It was hers. A woman in her early 60s, with warm brown eyes and a nervous smile. She was seated in a small apartment, an oxygen tank behind her, a laptop open on the kitchen table. Her name was Janine Holloway. "I never thought I'd be the kind of person who used a computer," she said with a laugh. "Heck, I didn't even know how to open an email." She talked about her husband passing, her children moving out, and how alone she felt, how she used to sit in silence most days, watching the light change on her living room wall. Then she talked about the tech classes, about the woman who taught them. "She made me feel like I wasn't stupid," Janine said, voice cracking. Like I still had value. Like learning something new at 63 wasn't just possible, but important. The screen showed footage of our classroom. Dorothy was there, smiling awkwardly at her webcam. One man was laughing as he clumsily sent his first emoji. There was even a clip of me adjusting a power cord, my name badge slightly crooked. Then the camera cut back to Janine. My son's fiancée came to visit. She asked me how I managed to email baby photos. I told her. Alyssa showed me. She stopped and stared like she'd heard that name before. She said, "Wait, Alyssa Morgan? You mean from Maplewood?" The entire room leaned forward as she continued. She looked like she'd seen a ghost. Then she said, "My fiancé used to be engaged to her." A ripple ran through the audience. I didn't know who Alyssa was before, Janine said, but after that day, I Googled everything. I read about what she's doing, what she's building. And I thought, my God, that man walked away from a revolution.
Gasps.
A few scattered laughs. I froze in my seat. My heart pounded so hard I could hear it in my ears. From the corner of my eye, I noticed a tall figure at the back of the room. He was half-shadowed by the exit light. Dark gray blazer. Familiar tilt of the head.
Ethan.
I don't know how long he had been there. I don't know why he came. But he heard it all. The host returned to the stage. And now, please welcome our 2025 Community Tech and Access Award recipient, Alyssa Morgan. Applause erupted. I rose slowly, trying to still my trembling hands. The spotlight blinded me as I approached the podium. I scanned the crowd, row after row of clapping strangers. Somewhere behind them, Ethan stood perfectly still. I took a breath and began. "I never thought I'd be here," I said. I didn't set out to create anything revolutionary. I was just trying to survive something I thought might break me. A pause. I started teaching tech skills to seniors because I needed to remember what it felt like to build something. I didn't know it would become what it is today. I looked down briefly, then up again, calm and steady.
This award isn't about me.
It's about the people who dared to begin again. The ones who walked into a room, stared at a glowing screen and said, "Okay, let's try." The audience was silent, engaged, present. I smiled softly. I didn't get here by being the best. I got here by refusing to disappear. I ended the speech. A standing ovation followed. As I walked off the stage, I didn't look for Ethan. I didn't need to, because that moment, unlike the ones I used to daydream about, wasn't about being seen by the one who left. It was about being seen by myself. Not because I demanded attention, but because the truth walked in by itself and refused to stay quiet. After the ceremony, I didn't rush out to celebrate. I slipped quietly through the side exit and walked along Broadway, the crisp March air cooling the flush in my cheeks. My heels clicked against the sidewalk in a steady rhythm that felt, for once, like my own heartbeat. A part of me wondered if Ethan was still inside, if he had stayed to watch me leave, if he'd tried to find me in the crowd. But another part, the part that had slowly, patiently learned to live without him, no longer cared. I paused in front of a darkened shop window and caught my reflection in the glass. For the first time, I didn't see a woman left behind. I didn't see failure. I didn't see someone with potential she'd never lived up to. I saw someone enough. And it wasn't pride. It was peace. The next morning, I found a card slipped under my apartment door. The envelope was ivory, the handwriting unmistakable, my mother's careful loops and flourishes. Inside was a single sentence, written in black ink. I saw the article. I'm sorry it took me so long to understand. I traced the words with my thumb, feeling a softness I hadn't allowed myself in years. I didn't frame the card or tape it to the fridge. I just tucked it inside my desk drawer with Maribel's notes and the first flyer I'd ever made. A quiet archive of all the ways I'd become real to myself. A few days later, my brother called. It had been months since we'd spoken beyond polite holiday exchanges. He cleared his throat, the way he always did when he felt out of his depth. "Hey, so Mom showed me that thing you won," he said. "That's pretty cool." I smiled into the phone. "Thanks." I didn't realize it was such a big deal, he added awkwardly. I mean, teaching seniors computers, I guess it's more than just, clicking buttons. It is, I said gently. There was a pause. Well, anyway.
Congrats.
Seriously. It wasn't an apology, but it was something. The next time I visited my parents, my mom pulled me into a hug that lasted longer than usual. She didn't say anything. She didn't have to. Some shifts are too small to measure in words. At Maplewood, life continued the way it always had, unassuming, steady, full of small miracles nobody filmed or posted about. Dorothy brought in lemon bars on my birthday, wrapped in wax paper and tied with a ribbon. I saw your face on the news, she said, smiling so wide her dentures threatened to slip. Don't think that means you're too fancy to help me with my printer. Never, I promised. We laughed until we cried. One afternoon, while packing up after class, I found a folded piece of paper on my keyboard. It was from Janine. You didn't just teach me the internet. You reminded me I'm not too old to start again. I kept that one too. I still saw Ethan sometimes, always from a distance, at a coffee shop, crossing the street, once walking hand in hand with Lauren. And each time, I expected the old ache to stir. But it didn't. Not because I'd outgrown him in some triumphant way, but because I'd finally stopped measuring my worth against his inability to recognize it. When you spend years hoping someone will see you, it feels almost disorienting to realize you were never invisible to begin with. You were just standing in the wrong light. I started to collect small moments of clarity, like souvenirs. The first time I paid rent without worrying if I'd overdrawn my account. The night I taught a volunteer how to lead a class on her own. The afternoon I realized I hadn't thought about the word failure in months. I didn't tell many people about the award after that first wave of congratulations. Not because I wasn't proud, but because I no longer needed external proof that my life mattered. I'd built something real. Something that outlasted the version of me who believed being chosen was the same as being whole. One evening, after everyone had left the center, I stayed behind to organize a new shipment of donated laptops. The sun was setting outside, painting the walls a soft gold. I paused, breathing in the hush that comes when a day has ended exactly as it was meant to. No fanfare, no performance, just enough. I thought about how far I'd come, how the girl who used to beg for validation now stood in an empty classroom, perfectly content with her own company. And I knew without a doubt that even if no one ever clapped again, even if no headline ever carried my name, I would keep showing up. Because I'd finally learned the difference between success and significance. Success is what the world gives you. Significance is what you claim for yourself. I didn't print my mother's note or my brother's half apology. I didn't post my award on social media. I just kept them. And that was enough. If you've ever felt like you were too small to matter, if you've ever watched someone walk away and wondered if that meant you were less worthy, if you've ever measured your life by the applause you didn't get, I want you to hear me now. You were never invisible. Sometimes the world teaches us that our value depends on who notices us, who chooses us, who stays. Sometimes the story is written by people who never bothered to learn our language. But significance doesn't live in their recognition. It lives in the quiet things you do when no one is watching. It lives in the hands you steady, the hope you spark, the small kindnesses that multiply in the dark. When Ethan left, I believed for a long time that his absence was proof of my unworthiness. I replayed our final conversations, searching for the exact moment I became forgettable. But it wasn't until much later, until that night on the stage under a warm spotlight I never asked for, that I understood. Some people leave because they cannot meet you where you're going. They don't recognize the seeds you're planting, the foundations you're laying brick by brick. And that doesn't make them villains. It just means your journeys were never meant to last the same distance. I've spent so much of my life trying to be extraordinary by other people's standards. Trying to be impressive enough, shiny enough, successful enough that nobody would dare to look away. But in the end, all I ever needed was to be faithful to my own quiet calling. To keep showing up for something I believed in, even when it looked small. Even when it wasn't glamorous. even when the only witness to my work was me. Because the truth is, the most extraordinary things I've ever done were never posted online. They happened in dusty community rooms and borrowed classrooms, in hours of patient repetition, in the trust built one hesitant learner at a time. And you, wherever you are, whatever small corner you're tending, are no less worthy of celebration. I know it doesn't always feel that way. I know some days you look at the world and think, what does any of this matter? Who even sees me? Who will remember any of this when I'm gone? The answer is simpler than it sounds. You will. You will remember that you stayed. You will remember that you didn't turn bitter. You will remember that you kept your heart open, even when it would have been easier to close it forever. If you've made it this far in my story, I hope you'll take a moment to tell me yours. Where are you watching from? What have you built that nobody claps for? What quiet victories are you still tending in the dark? You are not alone. This channel, this little corner of the internet, is a place for human stories. Stories that don't fit into headlines. Stories that bloom slowly. Stories about second chances and small beginnings. If you've ever felt unseen, if you've ever wondered whether it was too late to start again, if you've ever needed proof that healing is real, this story was for you. I'm Alyssa Morgan, and I'm living proof that losing what you thought you couldn't live without can be the first step toward finding yourself. Thank you for spending this time with me. Thank you for listening to a life that didn't unfold in perfect lines. Thank you for believing, if only for these few minutes, that your own story deserves to be told. I'll be here, week after week, sharing more real stories. Stories without filters. Stories without shame. Stories that remind us all. You are more than what you've lost. You are more than who walked away. You are more than anyone else's measure of enough. If you can, take a second to write a comment below. Tell me who you are. Tell me what you're building. Tell me what you've survived. Because someone out there, maybe even someone you'll never meet, needs to hear it. And I promise you this. I'll keep showing up. I'll keep telling the truth. I'll keep reminding you that you were never invisible. Until next time, be gentle with yourself. Be proud of your quiet work. And remember, significance doesn't need an audience. It just needs you. Thank you. And see you soon.